Right, welcome everyone to our Zoom Q Community Zoom call with Helen Sanderson about working out loud. We will be recording this call and sharing it afterwards, so yeah, be careful if you have questions you'd rather not have shared afterwards. I'll just say a little bit about Helen before we get going. She has quite a long CV, so I've had to leave out an awful lot. But so Helen spent 20 years as a pioneer in person-centered care, most recently founding Wellbeing Teams to deliver support at home to older people and other needy groups. And the aim is to get to 600 teams in 3 years, which sounds like a huge number. They work in partnership with a charity she also founded, Community Circles. And this recent work of Helen's has been very influenced by Frederic Laloux's book, Reinventing Organisations, with its focus on self-managed, non-hierarchical structures, bringing your whole self to work and evolving purpose. And particularly by the community nursing organisation Buurtzorg. She's also certified in holacracy, using that novel self-managed structure to run the wellbeing teams. Helen spoke recently at a big event on radical approaches to public services, which was jointly organised by Q's Reimagining Health and Care, SIG, and the RSA. She is also a karate black belt, though she claims she wants to spend more time practicing yoga and mindfulness meditation. We'll see. And as well as all these things, she's a pioneer in working out loud, which is what she's going to be telling us about today. So over to you, Helen. Helen will speak for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions then. And if you could stay on mute unless you're asking a question, that would be helpful. So over to you, Helen.
Thank you. I think I describe myself as a practitioner of working out loud, but I'm going to pay homage to the pioneers as part of this presentation. So let's start with what is it? What is working out loud? And I wonder whether when you were a kid, you might have had a maths teacher who insisted that you show your working out, to enable her to see how you arrived at your final answer, what kind of thinking or steps you took to get there, and actually whether you made a mistake that you could learn from. And I think this is really the essence of working out loud, which is also called show your work by different people, or narrating your work. And then the next half an hour or so, I'm going to share how I'm working out loud, what I've learned from John Stepper, Austin Kleon, Jane Bozarth and Simon Terry and their influence on this, and share with you two approaches really, a very goal-orientated one that was developed by John Stepper, and a more general working out loud that Austin and others talk about. So let's introduce you to John. But actually, before I do that, if you're on Twitter, it would be wonderful if during this presentation I invite you to tweet to some of the people that I'm talking about. So my Twitter handle is @HelenWBTeams. So please tag me into anything that you tweet so people can see the impact of our conversation over the next hour or two. So let me introduce you to John.
One quick thing I forgot to do. If people introduce themselves in the chat, if you are joining by video, it'd be great to say who you are and where you are in the chat. I forgot to say that at the beginning.
Great, please do that. Thank you very much. So my working out loud experience started when I met John, before his book got published, actually. And I was invited by Helen Bevan to facilitate a day with her team, the Horizons team. And as part of the preparation for that day, they showed me a big graphic of what they were currently working on. And it included the term WOL and John Stepper. So I asked them about that. And they very graciously introduced me to John, and I actually got to meet him in person. Here I am with John and Jackie Lyons, who sadly is no longer with us, but was a really big advocate and proponent of working out loud. And at that stage, that was back in 2015, John shared with me some of the early workings, the draft of his book. And at that stage, I was working with HSA, and we started to look at it, and we started to have a go at the circle guides. And I'll tell you a bit more about circles later on. So that was really exciting. And I remember one of the things that John said to me was that in the early stages of developing working out loud, his wife said to him, "Working out loud, isn't that just blogging?" And it's not. There are 5 key elements of working out loud, and this is captured beautifully on this sketch note. So I just want to use this to explain what it is and what it isn't. So if we start off with the generosity one, I am a pretty much off the scale introvert, and I know that networking has been for a long time seen to be something that's really good to connect with people. But there's a really big difference between working out loud and networking, because networking often comes from a spirit of, can I meet people to get things from, to get further work or different connections or whatever. But working out loud is a different kind of networking that comes from a position of generosity that says, how can I appreciate, contribute and connect, rather than a what can I get approach. So for me, it's very much a different but new kind of networking and connecting with each other. So the second one is relationships, which, as it says there, are very much at the heart of working out loud. But interestingly, it says here that the path to knowledge is via other people. Now, I'm a great reader of books, and I'll be introducing you to some of the books that influence this in a few minutes. But if you're reading a book, the knowledge that you're getting from that book will be at least 2 years out of date, because that is often the length of time it takes not only to write the book, but to go through the publishing process. So anything in the book will be at least 2 years out of date. If you're reading something in an article, it's likely to be 6 months, again, to up to 2 years out of date as well, for similar reasons. So the only fresh and current knowledge is what you'll find in blogs and what you'll find from people working out loud. And actually, with books and with articles, there are less opportunities to connect with the authors and share ideas and discuss it. But we see that much more in blogs and working out loud. So a path to very much current knowledge. John's approach is a goal-orientated approach, and he suggests that people identify a particular goal that they want to achieve and then think about who to connect to in relationship to that goal. And again, in a few minutes, I'll explore how we started to use that in HSA. But it's also very much done from a growth mindset, from being open and curious and connecting with people from a spirit of, I wonder what will happen next, as opposed to a traditional networking, how can you serve me with my goals? And finally, the working out loud bit in John's process is the visible work, how you can amplify who you are and what you do, essentially, so people can then come and find you. So if you're interested in something very particular, people will only be able to connect with you if you're sharing on social media or on other platforms what it is you're interested in. So it's a really great way of helping people find you. So one of the people who found me around this is a woman who's now a friend of mine called Susan Basterfield. And in 2015, I did Seth Godin's Alt MBA program. And the first task of that program was to write a book review. So I chose John's book to review, Working Out Loud. And Susan then connected with me on that basis because it was a book that she'd found very beneficial as well. So after the program, Susan and I connected, and every 2 weeks for a while, we were sort of accountability buddies around working out loud. And I'll share with you in a few minutes how we did that. So let's look at this. So this is a template that I developed when I was first working with HSA to help us distill some of what John shares in his book and to put it into practice. So the first thing John would recommend is that you have a goal. So you think about something that you want to achieve. And in his book, he gives an example of somebody who wanted to move to Australia and work there. So it could be something like that. It could be around building a business. It could be deepening your knowledge in a particular area. But he recommends having a specific goal. And then the next thing you do is identify 10 people who are in some way connected with that goal. And in a few minutes, I'll share my goal and how I identified people who connected to it. And then what you do next is essentially find out where those people hang out. So you then track them down. So you find out whether they're present on Twitter, whether they're on LinkedIn, whether they're publishing blogs on their own site, whether they're present on Medium, which is a blog site. So if you want to connect with somebody, it makes sense to hang out where they're hanging out and to be able to see what they're doing, who they're talking to, what they're tweeting, what they're sharing there. The next thing John recommends you do is to think about where you are now in relationship to that person. So the 5 stages, and I think we slightly tweak this from John's, is 0 is they don't know I exist. 1 is you're connected in some way, so you might be following each other on Twitter or connected on LinkedIn, but you haven't had an exchange with them of any kind. 3 might be, 2 is that they know you exist and you've had at least 1 interaction. 3 is you have multiple interactions and they remember you and who you are and your name. 4 is then a bigger jump to you regularly call on each other for help or advice. And 5 would suggest a sort of mutually supportive relationship. And the word trusted advisor comes from, I think, Peter Bloch's work, but you have that kind of connection with each other. And then the posture of generosity with working out loud is making a contribution to people. So again, rather than asking, it's connecting with them around contribution. And these are our 10 suggestions that John makes. So 1, reading something that someone's written and making a comment. So it might be going over to their blog and making a comment on it, or following their podcast and making a comment there. It might be congratulating them on a new job or milestone, and LinkedIn makes it really easy to do that because it tells you when people, or it certainly used to tell people when taking a new job or a milestone. Appreciate someone with a public thank you, and I've been doing some of that this morning with the people that I've learnt working out loud from. So John Stepper, Austin, Simon and Jane, and publicly thanking them for their learning. And I must admit, I think the British psyche is really, can struggle with this because we have a really big problem with sucking up to people, and particularly people who are seen as more powerful than you are or more famous than you are. I personally experienced a natural reluctance to do that, but I've got over that through working out loud, and I recognise that people appreciate being appreciated, so I'm paying much more attention to doing that. There's a really easy way to do that on LinkedIn, which is doing a recommendation for people as well. Sometimes one of the ways that you can contribute is by offering support to people. And again, you'd be judging your relationship with somebody to know whether that was appropriate or not. But also asking for help or advice is another way of appreciating people and making a contribution. You can ask questions that help people share their expertise with others. Share resources that you found useful with other people. I think one example is before other people joined us, we were talking about the radical check-in that takes place at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday on Twitter and on Facebook. And the event that Matthew mentioned, a number of us who were part of that event have started connecting with each other much more intentionally over Twitter. And one of the conversations we were having on a Thursday morning, I think Adrienne was sharing about how she shared stories at the beginning of meetings. So that then led me to invite Jackie Lefebvre, who's an expert on values and storytelling, and to invite her to do a webinar with us to share her learning of storytelling. So I guess there, I enabled Jackie to share her expertise around storytelling and create an opportunity from other people to learn from Jackie. And then we're able to share the film of Jackie's film with other people too. So that kind of thing can happen really naturally. Share the person's resources with other people. I guess that'd be sharing Jackie's film. Endorsement, I've mentioned LinkedIn, but also saying thank you and appreciating people over Twitter and other social media. And also sharing resources that you've got and asking for feedback. And I'll talk a bit about how we do that. So in a nutshell, that's the process that we learnt from John. John recommends working out loud circles as a way of doing that. And that's a very specific process that takes place over 12 weeks. And John's created incredibly helpful guides for people to do that. And there's a set process that they use, but it includes thinking about your goal and refining that, then identifying who, deciding where you are in relationship to people. So going through some of the processes that we've identified here. So when Susan and I were acting as accountability buddies, which just means you connect with somebody and you hold each other to account, we used Trello to track our progress in working out loud. So I found our Trello board back in 2016. And what we did was we identified our goal. So there's mine and there's Susan's. The contribution reminder was those list of 10 things so that I could go to Trello and be reminded of it. So my goal then So I just read Frederic Laloux's book. I was very, very excited about it. I'd just heard of Buurtzorg. And at that stage, I wanted, this was before HSA became self-managing itself. My goal was to introduce teal to my team and to start a teal home care organisation. And these are the people that I had on my list. So the first person was Zoe Nicholson. Now, I'd never heard of Zoe, but Susan told me that there was somebody called Zoe who worked in Brighton, and they'd set up a self-managed NHS organisation. So I Googled Zoe, found out what the organisation was called. It's called Here now, but it was called that at the time, and went and found her on Twitter. And the speech bubble underneath that, and the one is you can, on Trello, you can then make notes underneath. So every time I made a contact with somebody, I'd record it on Trello, so I had a record of it. Then there was Jane Peitling, who many of you know, and Jane and I had connected over Twitter. I had met in person and had several conversations, so I rated my relationship with Jane at that stage as number 4. It felt incredibly audacious to put Frederic Laloux down there. Actually, I think we were using one. So one is the person hadn't heard of you. So Zoe hadn't heard of me and Frederic hadn't heard of me. That's why they had one in brackets. And then I knew that Brendan Martin was partnering with Buurtzorg. That was before their official partnership, I think. So I wanted to follow him. James Archer at that stage was working with Brendan in Public World. Susan had introduced me to Holacracy 1, and Brian wrote the book on Holacracy and is the author of Holacracy, so I wanted to follow him. Jost de Blok, obviously I'd heard of too, and Peter Devlin is somebody who worked with Zoe Nicholson. So when I Googled Here, his name popped up as well, so I added him to my list. So those were the people on my list. Most of the people on that list had never heard of me, and except for Jane, so this felt quite audacious and a big ask to then move our relationships on. So if we clicked on Brendan, so I put Brendan down as 3 then. So we'd obviously had a bit of correspondence at that. No, I think I'd changed it to 3 as a result of this. So back on the 11th of April 2016, I found Brendan on Twitter and retweeted a couple of things that he tweeted. And that's the easiest way to get started, is simply to find somebody on Twitter, read what they're saying and the things that they say that resonate with you, to retweet. And that then jumped from April to June for me starting to have conversations with him on Twitter, and then direct messaging him and telling him about the work that we were doing. And then Brendan suggested that I had a meeting with him and James over Zoom. So that then made me change my status. That's not quite the right word, but my relationship with Brendan I then put up to a 3. He knew who I was. We were having correspondence together and we'd met. And that happened between April and June. So that's how that worked with Brendan. And actually, in 2 weeks' time, Brendan and I are presenting together at a Nesta conference. So I'd consider us to have moved up to 4, as Brendan is somebody who I would ask questions of and have conversations with. And then let's look at Zoe. So I found Zoe, so I was obviously very busy on the 11th of April. I found her on Twitter. And what I then found out was that she knew somebody that I knew quite well, a woman called Sarah, who was doing some work in a similar space at that stage at Evermore. So Zoe was tweeting Evermore and saying how excited she was to have met Sarah. And I jumped in and said hello, because there are lots of similarities between the work that I was doing and the work that Sarah was doing, and I used Twitter to explain some of those. We had a conversation over Twitter, and then later on I tweeted a blog that I'd done and asked for her views on that, which again is one of the contributions. Then we moved our conversation on to direct messaging over Twitter. And then eventually that year, so that was in November of the same year, so between April and November, we then met in person, and we actually met at the British Library and had a coffee together. And then that led to this. So the next year, so this is July the following year, I was invited by Zoe, who's the person next to me, to spend 2 days with Here, having a conversation about a potential partnership between Here and at that stage Wellbeing Teams had been established. And the person next to Zoe is a guy called Mark Cannon, and I'll talk to you about why my relationship with Mark Cannon then became really important to me as well a bit later in the presentation. So for me, it's amazing that I went from tweeting Zoe to then being in a position where they both from an expertise and financially supported wellbeing teams to get going, and are still very, very significant to me personally and in the development of wellbeing teams. So I didn't have as a goal to meet people who could help fund and support wellbeing teams. My goal was broader than that. But it is quite amazing what can happen if you have a broad goal and then invite people, connect with people, and broadly just see what happens. So that was amazing to me. So now I'd like to introduce you to Austin Kleon's work. And again, if you're on Twitter, you'll see I've put Austin's Twitter handle there in the corner. So please tweet him. He's from Texas, I think. He might not be up just yet, but I'm sure he'd be delighted to know that we're talking about him. And I first learned about Austin, again from Alt MBA. One of the joys about Alt MBA is you get sent a pack of books about 2 weeks before you started. And one of the books was Austin's book, and I think it's the one before this, called Steal Like an Artist. And I think that the three things from Austin's work that really resonate with me is about thinking process, not product. And he talks about documenting your work along the way. And I just want to read a story from Austin's book, because I think it beautifully captures why this can make a big difference. So he says, in 2013, the internet fell in love with astronaut Chris Hadfield, who was commander of the International Space Station. 3 years earlier, Hadfield and his wife were sitting around the dinner table trying to figure out ways to create interest in the Canadian Space Agency, which, like many space programs, had faced major budget cuts and needed more public support. Dad wanted a way to help people connect with the real side of an astronaut's life, said Hadfield's son Evan, not the glamour and the science, but the day-to-day activities. Commander Hadfield wanted to show his work. Things fell into place when his sons explained social media to him, and he got set up on Twitter and other social media networks. During his next 5-month mission, while performing all his regular astronautical duties, he tweeted, answered questions from his followers, posted pictures he'd taken of Earth, recorded music, filmed YouTube videos of himself clipping his nails, brushing his teeth, sleeping, and even performing maintenance on the space station. Millions of people ate it all up, including my agent, Ted, who tweeted, "Wouldn't normally watch live video of a couple of guys doing plumbing repair, but it's in space." Now, let's face it, says Austin, we're not all artists or astronauts. A lot of us go about our work and feel like we've got nothing to show for it at the end of the day. But whatever the nature of your work, there's an art to what you do. There are people who'd be interested in it if only you presented it. So start taking photographs of what you do at different stages of your process. Shoot video of you working. This isn't making art, it's simply keeping track of what's going on around you. And take advantage of all the cheap, easy tools at your disposal. These days, most of us carry a fully functional multimedia studio around in our smartphones. So he really encourages people to narrate your day or narrate what you're working on and show it to people. And he suggests that you share something small every day, even down to what you're reading, and also teach and share what you're learning. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, nobody would be interested in what I'm doing or what I'm learning. And Jane Beaufort, who again, I really recommend, and you can see her Twitter handle there. So if you're on Twitter, please tweet her to let her know we're talking about her. She offers this challenge. If what you're doing isn't worth sharing, then why are you doing that? And I think that's a brilliant, brilliant way to think about work and think about the world. And this is her book. And as I say, I really highly recommend it, particularly if you're looking at working out loud in an organisation and if you want to link it to learning and development. She's very, very focused and purposeful around thinking about that. So Matthew invited me to share what I've been doing and trying about working out loud. And there are 8 different ways that I've been doing this. And I took quite a bit of an encouragement to get started because, like many people, I thought, who would be interested in what I'm doing? Doesn't it just feel outrageous and audacious to do that? Isn't it just bigging yourself up? So I had to get past lots of these internal objections to start doing it. But I'll start showing you the easy, simple ways that you can get started and see if any of these resonate with you. So the first one for me is thinking about how I can share what I'm learning as well as what I'm doing, and do that out loud. And there's a really simple way of getting started with doing that. And that's simply, if you're at an event, whether that's a webinar like this, whether that's a whole day event, to share with other people on Twitter or on LinkedIn what you're noticing, what you're learning, what feels challenging. So I was at the National Care Forum annual event last week, and Cormac was there, and Cormac was being his usual fabulous, challenging self. So I took a quote from Cormac and put it on a photograph that I'd taken. And there's a really simple way of doing that. Of course, you don't need to do that at all. But then, as well as sharing it on Twitter, I then shared it on LinkedIn. And as you can see at the bottom there, 44 people liked that. But there were 5 comments, so that means that we could have conversations about what Cormac was sharing with us. But the lovely thing was several people then used that to make an appreciation of Cormac. So Cormac then both got appreciated for his comment as well as us starting conversations about that too. So something really simple that anybody can do is sharing learning from an event. Here's an example from Jane's book. So this person here, and Craig Taylor from England, was at a conference in Vegas, and what he did at the end of every day was do a really quick film with his key takeaways from the event. And of course, that's really, really useful, particularly if you see people tweeting at an event that you wish you could have been there and you can't. If they're using a hashtag and then you can do a film at the end of it, that's really helpful for people who couldn't be there at the time. And while we were starting having these conversations, Simon was telling me about somebody who is doing a short film at the end of a book that she's read and sharing 3 takeaways. And I think that's a brilliant example too. So the other thing you can do is share what you're reading. And somebody that I follow on LinkedIn, Ed Curley, does that brilliantly. So on a weekly basis, he posts the book that he's reading. He'll often post a page that he's reading with highlighted extracts. As you can see, he makes really good use of hashtags, so people who are interested in the same things can come and follow him. And he also starts conversations about those books. And Ed, if you ever listen to this, you are personally responsible for a significant bill for me on Amazon, because I regularly bought some of the books that Ed's recommended, and the Scrum book there is actually sitting next to my bed at the moment. Another approach is to share what you're reading. So I think it must be about 18 months ago, I was tweeting with a colleague of mine, Claire Haig, and we were talking about the books that we were reading at the moment. And I think Helen Bevan had introduced the idea of doing book clubs online, I think she started a secret book club where she invited lots of people to come and join her in a book club that happened offline, and we were looking at things happening online as well. And this guy, Gary Turner, joined in the conversation because he was connected to somebody who was also following Claire. So he saw our conversation, and he mentioned that he did an annotated book list and was sharing what he'd learned from the books that he'd read in a way that Simon talked to us about earlier, in the way that Ed Curley did too. So he kindly posted the link to his book list, which looked like this. So the second book, so 6 in 6 was his book club. He was sharing the reading that he was doing for his personal development, and he mentioned this book by Perry Timms. Now, I'd never heard of Perry at that stage. So as I bought the book. I think I buy about 2 books a week. Bought the book, read it, was amazed. I never at that stage, even though I was really heavily into self-management then, never made the connection that what I was doing was anything to do with HR, bizarrely. And then when I read Perry's book, the resonance with the things that Perry talks about, his radical ideas and what I was doing was really exciting to me. So I posted on LinkedIn that I was reading Perry's book and some of my takeaways from it. And I copied Perry in it, and I copied Gary in it to say thank you too. And again, years ago, I'd always thought that connecting with an author and telling them that you're reading their book was sucking up. But as I said, I've got over that. And Perry then commented and invited me to join his Facebook community, which is looking at similar things. And so that was brilliant. And that enabled me to start different conversations with Perry on that format. And then we connected in different ways as well, and meeting some of Perry's colleagues. And I did the School for Health and Care Radicals a couple of years ago, and that's where I got introduced to the notion of weak ties and how important they are. And it's through these kind of connections that I've been connected to people who I would have never ordinarily got connected to through the circles that I move in, because I don't move in HR circles at all, and I certainly didn't then, although I do a bit more now. So this notion of weak ties and being connected to people has been really significant in my work. But there are times when I've connected to authors and they haven't connected back, and that's fine too. So when I was researching for my TED talk, I found the work of Professor Jeffrey Pfeffer, which was phenomenal. And his book is called Dying for a Paycheck. And I found Professor Pfeffer on LinkedIn and commented about how useful I'd found his book. And he didn't comment back at all. So was I disappointed? No, not really. I mean, it would have been nice, but I wasn't disappointed, because actually it's more about how working from a posture of generosity and wanting to connect with people. And it's almost like if they connect back, it's an added bonus, but actually wanting to make sure people who read great work are appreciated for it is very much where I'm coming from. So that's the first one, learning out loud, sharing what you're reading, the difference that it's making to you, finding out what other people are reading too. The second one is what I'm doing now. And somebody, again, who I met on Alt MBA, introduced me by his blog to the idea of a now page. So on my blog site, there's a page that's called my now page, which I update most weeks. And of course, updated it especially this week because I knew I was doing this. And I use the page to share what I'm doing at the moment. So it's what I'm particularly focusing on and where I'm working. And often I will tag in to this the people that I'm working or learning with. So at the moment, I'm thinking about wellbeing teams and personal health budgets. We're setting up in Thurrock, and I'm in Thurrock on Monday. This is the bottom of the page. So I was talking about other things that I'm doing around mental health. And I also include, so if I'm working on my calligraphy, I'll include that. If I'm doing stuff on my ceramics, I'll include that. Or if I'm going on a yoga course or something, I'll include that. So for me, it's usually a mixture of work stuff and personal thing. And I've been looking more at self-compassion. And I did a course with Amanda Super last year. So I then tweeted this and tweeted out my now page and said, oh, Amanda, I talked about you on my now page. I talk about what I'm reading. So these are the 3 books that I'm reading at the moment. And if I'm sharing or presenting anywhere, I'll usually put that in as well. So here we are, Working Out Loud webinar with the Health Foundation. What would have been even better is sharing the link there. I didn't do that. And in Australia, I'm talking at the Compassion Revolution, and I must update that and put a link in there. What I'm trying to pay more attention to is making sure that when I'm sharing things, I'm crediting the people that I got this from. So here I put that this was inspired by reading Michael Novak's blog, and that's a link to Michael's blog. And Michael credits it back to Derek Sivers, who did the original now page. And if you follow that link to Derek's page, you can then see all the other now pages that people are doing as well. So I wonder whether in the future we could expect our leaders or invite our leaders to contribute their own now pages. There are people that I followed. I'd love to know what they're working on at the moment, what they're reading, and where they're presenting. So I personally, for me, I would love for more people to be doing now pages. The other thing is sharing work in different stages of its progress. So let me give you some examples of that. So one of the things that I'm learning is I'm trying to get better at using graphics to capture what I'm doing. And I'm nowhere near the sort of sketch note quality of the one I shared earlier. And I'm sharing a Saskia one, Saskia's done later on. But I know that capturing things visually really works for me personally. And so what I'm trying to do is share early examples of what I'm doing before it becomes more polished, or before I invite somebody else to make it look much better than I can. So we have a monthly leadership team meeting or steering group in Thurrock. And one of the things that came up at the meeting was people in the hospital discharge team saying, we don't know what the difference is between local area coordination, community-led support, or what wellbeing teams are doing. So I had a Zoom with Jenny Pitts, who is leading community-led support from NDTI, and asked if we could get together to see if we could create a graphic. So we had a conversation and generated this graphic as a result of it. Jenny then went on to share the graphic with her teams to get their ideas about how it could be improved. But I wanted to share it here because if it didn't make sense to people who didn't know about local area coordination or community-led support or wellbeing teams, then it wasn't doing its job. So what I've tried to start doing is sharing version 1 of something that I'm working on, and then asking people for their views. And people are generous enough to leave comments to say, I don't understand that, or it's got too many straight lines, but then what people sometimes do is reshare it and invite other people to contribute to it as well. And if I'm wanting people with specific knowledge, so you'll see there I'm tagging Brian Frisbee in it, and Martin Routledge and Sean Lockwood, because they are key people in the worlds of local area coordination and community-led support too. And I want to make sure that the pioneers of this work see what I'm doing so that they can comment too. So part of my working out loud practice is trying to share early versions of what I'm doing and getting feedback on it. This is another example, and again, this came from the work that I'm doing in Thurrock. So I'm working with a Centre of Independent Living there, and they were sharing with me the idea behind a nap wheel. And this is a poor photo of the photo that they shared with me, but good enough to share. So this is what a nap wheel looks like. And on the other, so what we're doing in Wellbeing Teams is developing our own version of a nap wheel, but doing it under different headings. So there I've put, here's our starter list of 7 areas to consider on our own nap wheel. And I ask people to share ideas and themes so that to see whether those 7 themes make sense, to see whether people have got other ideas. And again, people often generously contribute their ideas. On Monday, I'm meeting back with Centre Independent of Living and back with Thurrock, and we've got the next version that has the 7 themes. I will take another photo of it and then come back to LinkedIn and share with people the next iteration so people can see how it develops over time. And that's very much what Austin Kleon is talking about. How do we take regular snapshots of what we're doing at different stages and share it, but also invite people to help make it better. Co-creating takes this to a next level, and again I want to share an example of how we did that. So one of the books that significantly influenced my work over the last 2 or 3 years is Neil Eastwood's book Saving Social Care, which is really about best practices in finding and keeping great staff. One of the things that he mentions in the book that I hadn't heard of before is something called referral cards. And he doesn't share any images of them, he just says that they're a great idea. So what I did with a couple of colleagues is come up with 10 ideas of the kind of things that we could put on the front of referral cards. I took a snapshot of it and posted it on LinkedIn, but went a bit further than just showing my work and asking for contributions. Is we then asked people specifically to make suggestions about other ones to add and to change the text. And we got about, I think, 15 people got engaged with us around that. And then what we did is I shared a longer list and asked people to vote on their favourites. And then we took the 6 top ones that people thought were the best. And these were them. So these were people's 6 top suggestions. I then got them designed and then asked people from the 15 people who joined in with us to send me their names and address. And we made up packs of the final cards and sent them out to people. So that for me was a wonderful experience. Again, wisdom of crowds, getting people to co-create with me something that was practically useful to wellbeing teams. But then because we made it available to other people, I hope other people were finding it practically useful too. And it generated a lot of conversation about the pros of referral cards. So what these means, these are, so if you went to a restaurant and had fantastic service, that when you were paying the bill, you might need a card from here and your choice of that. So you might use people like you brighten the day, or another one, or the world needs more people like you and so do we. And then on the back, it's got, we want you on our team, and we then write a personal message and leave our phone number for people to get in contact with us if they're ever interested in a job in care. So number 6 is what I'm learning. And for the last almost 2 years, I started it in September, I've done a weekly film on LinkedIn, and I've also then posted it to my YouTube channel of what I'm trying and learning in Wellbeing Teams, starting right from the beginning when we registered, before and through my process of getting registered with CQC, right through to my last post was 2 weeks ago, and I'm due to post another post today. And somebody said to me, oh, you must love doing films to do that every week. And the answer is no. And the first time I did about 8 outtakes before I did it. I like to do 1 or 2 outtakes, but I'm much better at just doing it straight. And they're no more than 2 minutes, but it's part of my reflective process. So it means that every week I'm thinking about what I've learned and what I've got to share. I'm trying to be brave enough to be more vulnerable, and that's part of my personal journey and what I want to learn about getting better at. So I'm also sharing the things that I'm not good at. And I'm also using it to shout out to people. And here you can see I'm shouting out to Helen Thompson, my coach Alistair Scott, who are encouraging me to do more of this and get better at it. And I shout out to Helen there because I saw a great example in her office when I was working in her office the other day. So come and find me on LinkedIn. You'll see my back, my back thing of films. It really embarrasses my children who are on LinkedIn, but I'm over that. So I'm just keeping showing up saying, here's what I'm trying and learning. But for me, it's really part of my reflective practice. And this is taken from Jane Bozarth's book, and it's from a student nurse. And I think this is a really lovely example of her reflective practice and how she translated her learning from textbooks to what it's like to really do that in practice. And sharing what that meant for her in terms of her learning about empathy. And again, it'd be wonderful to see more students being encouraged to work out loud in this way and really thinking about what their reflections and what it means for them on their journey. And here's a lovely, great example from a consultant. So Damien is a really important person in the NHS Change Day. He is actually credited with the tweet where it got started between him and Helen Bevan. And he uses the hashtag what I learned this week, which is a hashtag that's often used in schools. I don't know if any of you got kids, and that's something that's often used in schools. And what he's done on a weekly basis is sharing a blog that's what he's learned this week. But as you'll notice, it doesn't look from this that he gets lots of engagement on it, which I think makes it even more impressive, because clearly he's doing this as part of his practice, about how he wants to show up and how he wants to share his learning. And something he did went viral a couple of months ago to do with swallowing Lego. So if you want to find out more about that, go and track down Damien on Twitter, and I'm sure you'll see that there. Another way that I'm working is sharing the inside story. And again, that relates back to the story that I read about the astronaut example from Austin. And I'd like to share with you some people whose work I really admire for how they're doing this. So over here, we've got Sarah. Now, she's the chief exec at the Fremantle Trust. She's relatively new into this post. I think she's only 3 or 4 months in. One of the things that she did early on is she went back to the floor. So she went to find out what it takes to work out as a care assistant in one of the homes that Fremantle have. And she documented that and shared it both on Twitter and on LinkedIn. So here she is, which is brilliant, going back to cutting up vegetables and doing food. She went further than that just a few months ago, and she went and lived in one of the care homes as well. And she shared through Twitter and on LinkedIn how she was doing. And then eventually it also became an article in The Guardian. So I think she so here she's not sharing what it's like to work as a CEO, but she's sharing very specifically how she went back to the work floor and how she actually lived in one of the care homes and what she learned there. But here's a CEO who regularly shares what it's like to be a CEO and his experience there. And he also goes back to the floor at least once a year and goes and spends time with his team members. So this is Andrew Cannon, CEO of Voyage. He's present on Twitter. And the great thing about what Andrew does is he does it through films, and he's brave enough to share the lows as well as the highs. So again, I think he's showing excellent leadership, vulnerable leadership here, not just with his team members, but publicly on Twitter about what he's noticing in his organisation and what it's like to be a CEO. And inspired by both of them, I was on shift on the Easter holiday, working with the teams in Oxfordshire. And I took photos of what I was doing, where I had permission to do that, on Twitter. I think one of the ones that got the most engagement was talking about hugging somebody that I was supporting, because as I was leaving, I asked him if I could give him a hug, and we really connected in the 4 visits I did that day with him. And he said, I haven't had a hug from a long, long time. And that sparked conversations about professional boundaries and touch in the workplace as well. But I then pulled that together into a blog on LinkedIn and talked about my 7 reflections from being on shift, and actually what it was like to be on shift, how many how many commodes I emptied, how many meals I did, so I went through my shift in numbers as well. So that's been part of my practice since being inspired by those other CEOs. But the classic from both Jane's work and from Austin's, and one of the elements of John's Working Out Loud, is actually showing your work. And I'd like to share a great example from Saskia, who I believe is on this call now. So Saskia is a consultant in palliative medicine. I met Saskia via Twitter. We've connected over Twitter. I'm deeply appreciative of her sketchnoting work. This is one that she shared that relates to the work and the learning that we've both been doing with a colleague of ours called Andy Brogan. And she's been sharing some work around confirmation practices, and she's really, really brilliant at sketch notes, and you can see a really good example there on her pinned tweet. So this is a great example of somebody, a consultant, sharing what she's doing around sketchnoting, engaging with other people around that, and she's also part often of the check-in at 8 a.m. on Thursdays for the radical check-in. So come and join us there. And it's been a pleasure. It was a pleasure to have a conversation with Saskia last week and in talking about the connections between her work and wellbeing teams. And this is what I'm trying to do. So one of the really obvious ways of sharing your work is through blogs. And this is a blog that I did with Andy Brogan, again around confirmation practices. The visual from Saskia there was her take on that. And this was a film that I did when CQC were coming to inspect us. So I did a sort of show and tell film of all the things that we were doing. This is our Living Well at Home board, which is a key part of our meetings in wellbeing teams. And we use metrics as well. And I kind of walked around the room and say, these are the things that we're going to be showing CQC when they arrive later on today. So blogs, films, and sharing images like Saskia's touch note, sketch note are great ways of doing that. So what you might be wondering is, well, Helen, that's really, really good, but actually I'm very busy, and who can possibly find the time to do all that? So I'd like to read you something else out of Austin's book. He said, don't say you don't have enough time. We're all busy, but we all get 24 hours a day. And people often ask me, how do you find the time for all of this? And I answer, I look for it. You find time the same place you find spare change, in the nooks and crannies. You find it in the cracks between the big stuff, your commute, your lunch break, the few hours after your kids go to bed. So he strongly says, if this really matters to you, you will find time to do it. And Simon, and again, Simon's Twitter name is there if you want to tweet him, introduced me to the idea of working out loud around the clock, which is his personal practice around tweeting and connecting with people and looking at blogs. So he does his first tweet when he has coffee in the morning, so the first thing in the morning. He'll likely to do his second tweet just after or just before lunch, and then he'll do his last tweet just before he clocks off for work. So he's working out loud around the clock is 3 particular times during the day, he'll pause. You might read somebody's blog and tweet about it. An easy way to do this is to do a Twitter list of the people who you're focusing on if you're using John's approach, so that it's very easy to use your Twitter list and then see what they're tweeting and either join in the contribution or go and see their latest blog and comment after their blog as well. Simon's other really big contribution, well, it's a huge contribution, is he set up Working Out Loud Week. So if you're interested in that, and I'm not going to tell you what month it is, I'm going to suggest that you tweet to Simon and ask him, or tweet Wall Week and ask there. And that's a week where people who are wanting to develop their practice around working out loud or are working out loud get together across social media to share what they're doing. So finally, why would you do this? Why would you bother to make the effort and do this? What difference has it made to me? So I'd like to share with you, first of all, the difference that this makes around relationships. And this is a quote again from Austin's book. He says, put yourself and your work out there every day and you'll start meeting some amazing people. And that's absolutely been true for me. So both you'll find them, they'll find you, and they are likely to generously connect you with other people. So in terms of you'll find them, one of the people that I found by working out loud is Mark Smith and the other radicals that I've mentioned, who I was lucky enough to meet in person at an RSA and Q event with Easy Rink a few months ago. So Mark Smith has introduced me to some of the amazing work that he's been doing, which absolutely inspires me to keep going and to learn from him. So it's introduced, you find people who inspire you, who are doing similar work, who you can follow their journey. I follow his blog and learn from them. But also they might find you because you're sharing your work and sharing your passion and your interests. So Louise, who's a coach with Neighbourhood Midwives, listened to one of my podcasts and then shared it with Annie Francis, who is the CEO of Neighbourhood Midwives. And from that, we got in touch via email. We then had a call together, and we then I connected them with Andy Brogan, and Andy went to do some work with them. And long story short, I would now consider Annie to be one of my closest friends, and I've learned such a lot from her. And I can see possibilities of us working together in the future. But that's because I had a podcast out with Lisa Gill and was talking about the work that I was doing, and have a SoundCloud account and was sharing some of the work that I was doing. And Louise found me and generously shared that with Annie. Two other people, Trudy and Violin, are innovators and pioneers and entrepreneurs who share the same mission as I do, which is wanting to think really differently about home care, about the conditions of women working in home care, their terms and conditions, and wanting to create more spaces for self-management. And they connected with me and said that we've heard about you from lots of different people, and we know our vision and mission is the same. We have conversations? So they started to share with me some of what they were doing and asking my advice. So we started looking at their approaches to risk, what they thought the greatest risks were. And I shared some of what we've learnt in Wellbeing Teams. And that led to this 2 weeks ago. And actually yesterday we celebrated signing an agreement to work with their organisation, Bellevue, with our wellbeing teams in Oxfordshire. And what we were doing here is putting together a social contract about how we'll work together. So that's with the two great women from Bellevue and me and my colleague, Mary. As I said, Jane is, let me just go back to this thing here, is they'll connect you. So I mentioned earlier that when I met Zoe Nicholson, I was stood next to in the photo with Mark Cannon. So when I met Mark at that 2-day session that we had with Zoe and with Here, Mark introduced me, of course, to Andy Brogan. And again, cut a long story short, Andy and I then connected in several ways, met up and started working together. And Andy now is one of the advisors for Wellbeing Teams and has really informed so much of our work around governance and introduced us to confirmation practices, which were, I believe, significant in us getting CQC outstanding in Well Led. And then Andy introduced me to Jeremy Cox, who at that time was working as Director of Quality with CQC. And Jeremy was a great encouragement to me when I was terrified last year of how on earth CQC were going to judge us as a self-managed team when they haven't inspected a self-managed team in adult social care before then. Susan Basterfield, who I've mentioned earlier, introduced me to Lisa Gill, who's somebody I've learnt so much from, and I highly recommend her podcast, Leadermorphosis. And she's a leading curator, really, of work and practitioner around self-management. And then Dom, who I met right back when I was facilitating for Helen Bevan and her team. He introduced me to Bethan Bishop, who has introduced me to a whole number of tech people who I can now talk to about chatbots and other founders and entrepreneurs. And she's set up a great group on Facebook that I highly recommend, that's for founders. And she's now become an accountability buddy with me around some work that we're doing together. I'm an introvert. I would never have met any of these people through traditional methods of trying to connect with people at conferences or going to networking events. And I tried going to a networking event 18 months ago. It was an RSA event. I took my friend and colleague Martin Routledge with me for moral support. And even then I only lasted 10 minutes and then had to leave because my ability to make small talk is very, very poor. So one of the huge benefits for me around working out loud is the amazing people that I've met, and then what that has led to, not just in terms of my learning, but some very practical, tangible results from that in my work. This is a page of from the book from Jane Bozoff. And I think this is, again, the notions of so much of our work is in silos. If we continue just to connect with people in silos, we will never benefit from connecting across weak ties and different ways of working together. And she talks specifically about how you can do that inside organizations. And that's been some of John's great work as well, is how you can connect across intranets and across Yammer and inside organizations. And again, if our work isn't observable or visible, it's then going to be really impossible to connect. So I think that's a really powerful part of this. And I love this quote again from her book about our most expensive most valuable asset is people. You'll hear lots of HR people saying this. But if we don't enable people to work out loud or encourage and support them and to connect, that we aren't going to make them the most of this very valuable asset and learn and develop solutions more quickly. So as we come to the end, here's a few things that I'd like to share that are practical. And I'm sorry I wasn't aware of the time. And I hope some people can stay a bit longer if they've got questions. But because I've been working out loud, it enabled Mark Hall from the RSA to find me. He then involved me in some research that he's been doing around self-managing teams in health and care. Long story short, that's eventually led to a partnership between Wellbeing Teams and the RSA. And for Ruth Hannon, who's the new Transform Programme Manager, to be working directly with me to support and spread Wellbeing Teams. Connecting with Perry and eventually meant that Perry joined us as our national advisor in HR, and he's given me opportunities to share what Wellbeing Teams are doing. And this is taken yesterday, where I had the opportunities to share as part of the Festival of Work. And it was directly because of Perry that I had the opportunity to do a TEDx about our experience in Wellbeing Teams last year. So I think the future of working out loud is that it will become an expectation, that we will expect the leaders in our communities to be working out loud and to have things like now pages. I think we're way past the days where it's acceptable for CEOs and leaders saying, oh, I don't do social media, it's not for me. I think this is becoming an expectation of visible leadership for our leaders in organisations. I will expect it to be in job descriptions if it's not already, particularly for learning and development people who need to be walking the walk about different connected ways of sharing. And I particularly point you to the work of Jane Hart and modern workforce learning. So 6 quick ways to get started, and then I'm going to end with an offer from me. So I recommend that you buy the books and follow on Twitter and in their blogs, John Stepper, Austin Kleon and Jane Bozoff. They are the people that I've learned such a lot from. You might decide that an easy place to start is internally. And if your organisation has an intranet, that might be an easy way to start. Because I'm an introvert, I do my processing internally, and my colleagues in HSA said it was really hard to know what was going on in my mind until I presented it as a fully formed idea. So I started doing a Friday internal post to my colleagues in HSA to say, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I've been working on this week, and this is what I'm planning on doing next week. And that then, in some ways, was the internal equivalent of my now page. If you're not present on social media, I really encourage you to do that. I think that's the only way to work out loud, is then being present with other people who are working in these ways. And you can find and join communities of interest, your tribe, as it were, on Facebook and on LinkedIn. You might be interested in joining a Working Out Loud circle. You might be interested in creating a now page. And John suggests it takes no more than 15 minutes a day, but you could just start with 5 minutes a day and just set your alarm every day for 5 minutes over lunch or sometime in the day and say, who can I connect to now? So finally, because I hear Matthew's come back, this lovely quote from Brené Brown: for more connection to happen, and learning and leadership is shown through connection, we have to allow ourselves to be seen. Over to you, Matthew.
Thank you, Helen. That was a fabulous and inspiring talk all around working out loud. I'll, as we're up to the hour, I think I'll stop the official kind of recording now. But if people can stay for a few minutes, that would be great to ask a few questions. If you've got a few minutes to answer a few questions, Helen?
I certainly have, yes.
Yeah. So thank you very much for all of us. That was truly inspiring, and I hope maybe you'll be able to share. In the spirit of working out loud, I'm sure the slides will be shareable or visible somewhere, so we'll share them.
Yes, of course.
Thank you everyone for joining us, and yeah, if you can stay to just ask questions and listen, that would be great. Thank you.